Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So, inshallah, we will begin our weekly Friday evening halaqa. Tonight, we will be continuing with the Khilafah of Uthman radiallahu an. We've been speaking about different regions during his Khilafah. So, last week, we spoke a little bit about the city of Kufa. We spoke about the original governor of Kufa, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. We spoke about his time during Umar radiallahu anhu's Khilafah, and then we spoke about how he was Khalifa originally in the time of Uthman. Eventually, some issues arose between him and another companion, and Uthman decided to have him step down and place somebody else. Then we went into speaking about Damascus and the region of the Sham region that is there. We spoke about how Muawiyah radiallahu an established a navy and he took the island of Cyprus. So this was the first naval conquest, and we spoke a little bit about the details regarding that as well. We also spoke about an incident that took place between, and I think we ended with this story about an incident that took place between Muawiyah radiallahu an and Abu Dhar. And we spoke about the personality of Abu Dhar and his viewpoints and how this kind of attracted or created, in a sense, certain issues in the community which Muawiyah complained about to Uthman radiallahu an, that speak to Abu Dhar. These are some of the things that he's spreading. So that is the last story that we went and spoke about during our last Friday Halaqa. Today, let's turn to another region, the area of Egypt and North Africa. And we'll be talking about some of the conquests that took place during the time of Uthman in this region. We'll talk about some of the governors and commanders of the army at that time. And then we'll talk about some of the general public works that Uthman radiallahu an was doing during this time as well. So if you remember Amr ibn al-As, who is the companion that went with the army to Egypt, and he took the lands of Egypt during the time of Umar radiallahu an. So that's Amr ibn al-As. He's the one that established Masjid al-Amr. The masjid is still present in our day and age. It's a very beautiful masjid, very, very large. But that was the capital that he established, or the garrison town that he established, the military town that he established in Egypt. It's in modern day, it's in Cairo, but originally it was a city, or in the outskirts, you can say, of Cairo. But today it's covered within Greater Cairo, as Cairo's expanded a lot more than what it originally was. So Umar ibn al-As is that Sahaba, the conqueror of Egypt in a sense, the Fatih of Egypt. And he was governor there during the time of Umar, and he was also governor there during the time or the beginning of Uthman's Khilafah. If you remember, we mentioned that in the early period of Uthman's Khilafah, many cities, they started to rebel when they found out about Umar radiallahu anhu. One of the major rebellions that took place was in the city of Alexandria. So this took place about in the first 2 years of Uthman radiallahu anhu's Khilafah. So it didn't take place the day after Umar radiallahu anhu passed away, but within the first 2 years. And they eventually broke their peace treaty. They were backed by the government in Constantinople, the Byzantine government in Constantinople, and issues started arising. Eventually, Amr ibn al-As, he took the military, he fought with them again, and he ended up succeeding again. So he won again, once again, in the city of Alexandria. He then took the army there, broke down some of the walls in Alexandria that surround the city, and Alexandria became part of this region again under the hands of the Muslims. Now, during this time, when they take back Alexandria, Amr ibn al-As, he dispatches Abdullah ibn Sa'ad. This is going to be an important name for us to remember. So Abdullah ibn Sa'ad is dispatched to lead the armies in northern Africa. So to open up the lands of northern Africa, to lead the conquest of northern Africa, Abdullah ibn Sa'ad, this individual. Abdullah ibn Sa'ad is Abdullah ibn Sa'ad, this individual. Abdullah ibn Sa'ad is 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 this individual. uh, he is going to become, as you'll see, the governor and the military leader of. He's going to become the governor of Egypt, but he'll also be the military leader, the main military leader that leads many campaigns during these years in the northern African region. So that's why I said it's an important name for us to remember. Here, he's fighting in an area between Tripoli to Algeria and certain areas of northern Morocco, even according to certain traditions. So this area, it's said that it was ruled by an African king at that time. The king's name was Jarir, I believe. That's what Imam Bajuri's book I have states. I'm not sure what the non-Arabic name of the king at that time in that region was. So I'm sure if somebody looks into it, who was the ruler of those northern coastal regions of North Africa, um, whatever would correspond to the Arabic version of Jarir. So Jarir was, according to the Islamic books, he was the king that ruled those areas during that time, and on behalf of the Byzantine Empire. So it was, in a sense, under the Byzantine Empire, those coastal regions, and Jarir was in charge. So eventually their armies met, they fought, certain areas were done under peace treaty as well with Jarir, and there were a lot of negotiations in terms of how much taxes will be paid by those regions. Abdullah ibn Sa'd also returned to Egypt, and Uthman radiallahu an gave him, when he first returned to Egypt, Uthman radiallahu an appointed him as the collector of taxes, kharaj, land taxes, zakat as well, possibly. But that was his responsibility, that the responsibilities will be split. So this is Abdullah ibn Sa'd, the one who led the armies throughout North Africa. Once he's done, he returns to Egypt. He doesn't settle anywhere in those coastal regions, but he returns to Egypt. Once he returns to Egypt, Uthman radiallahu an appoints him as the collector of the kharaj taxes. Amr ibn al-As is appointed as the commander of the army. So the commander of the army, in a sense, is the de facto governor. But these two are given the power in a shared sense, that the taxes, the revenues, and all of that. And Amr ibn al-As will be the commander of the armies. This was done by Uthman radiallahu anh. Eventually, there was disagreements that arose between Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Sa'd. So Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Sa'd, they have disagreements between themselves, and this reaches Uthman, and Uthman removes Amr ibn al-As, and he places Abdullah ibn Sa'd in charge of both of those responsibilities. So originally the responsibilities were split. Eventually disagreements take place. Amr ibn al-As is removed, and Abdullah ibn Sa'd is granted both of those positions. Now this was again a decision made by Uthman radiallahu anhu. And Abdullah also sought Uthman radiallahu anhu's advice and requested more troops concerning the campaigns that are taking place in the northern or the north coast of Africa. So these campaigns, it's not a one-off thing, but it's a continuous thing in the beginning. So Uthman eventually raises more soldiers and troops, and he sends them under the command of Abdullah ibn Sa'd. And during this time, let me see, one of the companions were sent. There you go. Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Abdullah ibn Zubayr was sent with some more reinforcements to Abdullah ibn Sa'd, and to advise Abdullah ibn Sa'd as well. So to give him advice in terms of what to do. So one of the suggestions that he made to him was that split the army in two, have one fighting force during the mornings and have one fighting force during the evenings. So it tires out the opposition. So you have two rotating armies, and the Muslims at that time had very large armies as well, as the lands kept getting larger. And he said, have this sort of rotation between the two sets of troops that you're going to employ. And eventually that proved to be successful. So they were able to take many of these northern areas. It's not that every single battle that was fought by the Muslims was won. So there was obviously setbacks or whatnot, but overall these campaigns became very successful during this early period. Now, eventually Abdullah ibn Nafi', there's two Abdullah ibn Nafi's that were sent as military leaders by Uthman radiallahu anh. One of these, Abdullah ibn Nafi', who's Abdullah ibn Nafi' ibn Abdul Qais, he was placed as the governor of Africa, while Abdullah ibn Sa'ad was continuously looking after Egypt. Remember, Abdullah ibn Sa'ad didn't stay in those northern African regions. So Egypt, right? We're going to pretend at the moment that Egypt is not part of this region that's designated as, or what we can call this region as well as the Maghrib, right? So the Maghrib is modern day. When you say Maghrib, you're talking about Morocco, but the Maghrib actually refers to pretty much everything past Egypt. Or in a sense, some areas of Libya as well, but that region, so Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, the northern regions, that's known as the Maghrib. Like I said, modern day, when you say Maghrib, you're going to be talking about the country of Morocco, but the general term Maghrib means all of that. Now, Maghrib just means west. This is prior to the quote unquote discovery, in a sense, not discovery in the full sense because there's people living there, of the New World, right? So this is prior to the sailing of the Americas, the European exploration, let's say, instead of the discovery, the European exploration of the Americas. Because by that time, this is what they knew to be the lands of Maghrib, the Western world, right, at that time. A side point that I'll say, what's interesting is many of the coastal cities in Africa were trading with the Americas before the European exploration. That's why, I take back the word discover, because it's part of, a false historical narrative. That's clearly false. It's not even debated. So there was people living in those lands, the Americas, and there were trades going on between certain African kingdoms. But this is still the period that we're talking about is still a lot before those African kingdoms that come later on. And the people living there are living there probably at this time as well, during the 700s. Okay, so that is in terms of the northern African regions. And we said they pushed as far as areas of Morocco at that time. So to Algeria, they pushed into these important coastal cities, and they managed to bring this all under the land of the Muslims during that time. Now, as you can imagine, because of these conquests and this vast distances of land and vast amounts of land that came under the Muslim Empire, it drastically increased the revenue of the Muslims as well. So it increased the amount of funds that the Muslim Empire has at this time. It increased the amount of wealth that the capital Medina has, and also the regional capitals as well during this time, because now you're imagining this entire region is opened up. So what happens is there's Uthman radiallahu anh, he establishes salaries for different governors through the public treasury, right? The first thing is that the salary for the Khalifa, this was already established, if you remember, during the time of, anybody recall? It's only two possibilities, right? Abu Bakr or Umar. Does anybody remember whose Khilafah was this established under? The stipend or the salary of the Khalifa. See if the chat box is open. It should be open. Anybody recall? I don't see any answers coming in yet. Anybody want to take a chance? Okay, we have one. Umar. Anybody else want to take the other 50% chance? Right. So the salary for the Khalifa was established under the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. If you recall, going back, it was an idea of Umar. So that's probably why Umar is mentioned. But it was established during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr. So the idea was Abu Bakr was going out to engage in trade, or in basically in earning his own salary. And Umar radiallahu an, alongside other companions, suggested that if he engages in that, he's going to be worrying about organizing the empire, or organizing the Muslim city-state structure, and working a regular job, and that'll be too many distractions. So instead of doing that, let's set a stipend from the treasury, or a salary in a sense from the treasury for Abu Bakr, so he dedicates his entire time to worrying about the affairs of the Muslims. So that's when it was first established. This continued at the time of Umar. Both Abu Bakr and Umar, they were very stringent and very strict in terms of what they took. So they reduced it to the bare minimum necessities, right? And we spoke about this during the time of Umar, that if he would see this is extra, this is going above, he would reduce it even further. And he would only take that, like if the city was in famine, he would suffer through those situations with the residents of his city. So that was the time of Abu Bakr and Umar. Uthman radiallahu an, his salary, anybody want to take a guess what his salary was like? So we discussed, you should have a general answer to this. We discussed the personality, the qualities, the characteristics, just in general, we discussed Uthman. So one thing we know about Uthman, he's known as Uthman al-Ghani, Uthman the rich or the wealthy. So Uthman, he did not take any salary from Bayt al-Mal. And that is because, yes, that's correct, nothing. Uthman did not take anything because he was already wealthy. So he decided that because I don't even need to work. So it's not the fact that I am going to split my attention span between the affairs of the Muslims and this and that. He already was wealthy. He was a wealthy business individual, so he decided not to take anything. So he didn't take a salary from the Bayt al-Mal or the government. And this is important to understand as well, because many times, as we discussed in the last Halaqa, people tend to criticize some of the policies that Uthman implemented, right? Which is fine from a policy perspective, but we do not question the sincerity of Uthman radiallahu anhu. The decisions that he made, the policy decisions, whatever they may be, that he made, they were done out of sincerity. And it wasn't done that I want all the wealth of this dunya for myself or anything of that sort, and no malicious intent in that way. And this is proven through a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he talks. We did this very early on in Uthman's Khilafah. So if you want to revise some of those narrations, you can go back to that. But he mentions how after this day, whatever Uthman does is forgiven, and statements like this that show us the sincerity of Uthman being confirmed by the Prophet ﷺ. So here you see a highlight that throughout Uthman's Khilafah, although the Muslim empire became even more wealthy than it was during the time of Umar, Uthman did not take from the Bayt al-Mal for himself. He did take certain things that were rightfully his and give it out to his family members, but he didn't take it for himself. And he has his reasoning for that as well. He talks about how Abu Bakr and Umar, they did not distribute these things, but I'm taking what's rightfully mine and distributing it to my family on the basis of Silat al-Rahim, on the basis of taking care of your family and worrying about them and things like that. It's also mentioned, let me find out who says this. Imam al-Zuhri actually says this. There you go. Imam al-Zuhri mentions that Uthman ruled the Khilafah for 12 years. And this is in Imam Suyuti's book. He says, for 6 years, he ruled without people criticizing him at all. To the Quraysh, he was preferable to Umar because Umar was severe against them. But when Uthman ruled over them, he was gentle with them, and he made his connections close with them. So just that little part from Imam Zuhri's statement, it's a longer statement, but I just want us to focus and think about that part. So from what we spoke about in terms of the qualities of Umar's Khilafah and how he ruled, right? It was very different in terms of the structure. Umar radiallahu anh, when he was speaking to his son towards the end of his life, right? What did he tell his son? Nobody, you shouldn't seek the Khilafah. Although we said Abdullah ibn Umar was well qualified to be Khalifa, was well qualified in terms of his piety, his knowledge, his ilm. He was a scholar of the highest level, a faqih, right? A scholar of the legal sciences as well. So he's well qualified to lead the Muslims. And the people loved Abdullah ibn Umar as well. But Umar radiallahu anh did not want to make this a hereditary thing, that it's Umar's son, then Umar's son, right? He wanted to make sure that's completely avoided and nobody can point a finger to Umar and say this is what he did. And even going further, right? He held the Quraysh accountable to a higher level, and he wasn't easy with them. So he didn't simply because I'm Qurayshi, they're from my family. He does not want anybody to be able to point a finger and say, he's going easy on them or ruling for them or leaning towards them because he's Qurayshi or he's from that family. So that was Umar's philosophy, right? And again, we discussed how this is not a matter of right or wrong. This is just characteristics of different individuals, policy implementations. This is preference, right? Some people, when they analyze this, they say, okay, you know what? The Prophet ﷺ taught us to take care of our family or give importance to our family, our relatives or whatnot, and this is what I'm going to implement. Umar is looking at it from a different perspective. So it's not a matter of right or wrong, it's a matter of different outcomes. Now, you can say, for example, this policy or that policy by this Khalifa or that Khalifa worked better, right? As looking back at it from historical reasons and historical outcomes as well, that's perfectly fine. But to understand that simultaneously, whatever decisions they're making, it's done with good intent. It's done with the betterment of this ummah in whatever they think is right for this ummah. Okay, so Uthman radiallahu an, he was, as Imam Zuhri mentions, he was kinder to the Quraysh. He was nicer to them in that sense. So the Quraysh themselves, according to Imam Zuhri's statement, so this is not the downright rule that every single person of Quraysh, this is what they preferred. But Imam Zuhri is saying it generally, the Quraysh seemed to like Uthman's Khilafah more for them. That, he was nicer towards them. The policies were a little nicer towards the Quraysh, whereas Umar radiallahu anh was harsher towards the Quraysh. Okay. So Uthman radiallahu anh, during his time, the Islamic State had different provinces. These provinces had governors. Now, each one of these governors had their salary from the public treasury of that region or of that. Now, the governor, what they would do is they would collect the taxes, they would collect the zakah, any sort of other sorts of kharaj or taxes that are being collected from that area. And those taxes will be then, especially the zakat, will be then used in that region or in that province. From the rules or the fiqh rules of zakah that we have is when zakah is collected, it should be taken from the people and given to that people, right? So this is an important rule, commonly neglected, where we tend to send zakah overseas or somewhere else, which is permissible, but it's important for us to reflect over the idea that the Quran commands, and this is the structure of zakah, that it's supposed to be taken from the people and given to that area, that region. So in short, I'm trying to see how not to turn this into a long discussion on zakah. In short, the people that are of the region that you live in are more deserving or have more of a right to the zakah, right? Because zakah, there's two philosophies on zakah in Islamic fiqh. One is zakah is the rights of the fuqara. The other is zakah is the rights of Allah, meaning that you have to pay zakah as the rights of Allah. Imam Abu Hanifa's philosophy is zakah is the rights of the poor, so they actually have a right to it. But leaving that aside for a second, the idea is that people in your area, right, whether it be your state, your city, however you divide your region, your province, the people of that area are more deserving or have more of a right to the zakah that you are giving than somebody that's far away. There's a discussion on how zakah actually works. So you're supposed to give it to that area. So let's say if there's somebody that deserves zakah and everybody in our area is sending it abroad or somewhere else, right, we can all end up being sinful for neglecting the people who have the right to zakah. Remember, zakah is not a favor you're doing upon somebody. Zakah is not something that you're giving out of your generosity, right? That's not what zakah is. Zakah is a command, it's a fard. When you say, I am a Muslim, I submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're saying, I submit to the rules and regulations set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I am going to abide by them. One of those rules and regulations is the mandatory almsgiving or charity that you have to give. So it's not a favor you're doing upon somebody. Rather, it's an obligation upon you to do that. And that's why it's considered the rights of somebody else, the rights of the fuqara. They have a right to that. And that's the financial structure laid out by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu a'lam. So, that's something to consider when we are giving zakat, to make sure that the people of our area are taken care of at the bare minimum, right? So at least split your zakah, or try to make an effort to find out that the zakat is not directly needed here. Now, if it's not, then it can go to different areas. The other thing is, if you have a relative, a direct relative, then sometimes they're more deserving if they're eligible for zakah, and other conditions as well. So this is not a fiqh session, so we won't get into the fiqh details, but just something for consideration. What Uthman implemented here, or was implemented during the time of Uthman, was these provinces that collect zakah, the zakah would be given to those provinces from what they collected first. Then if there's anything left over, it would be sent to the capital and then distributed to regions that need it. So first, the region would be self-sufficient for itself, right? Determining the salaries for the appointed individual, out of the public treasury, the 1/10 tax on trading goods, the land taxes that they would collect, whatever government policies that they implemented, and the amount of taxes they collected, whether it be jizya, zakah, land tax, all of these things, it would be used for that region first. Anything left over would be sent to the capital and then redistributed for wherever it's needed more. So that was the general financial structure during the Khilafah of Uthman. And some of those things, now remember, these are coming into the capital in Medina. A very side note. So some of these things that are coming in from spoils of war and this and that, they're being sold, and then the money is being saved as well. So remember, a lot of these items, it's not always cash or money wiring or anything like that. Sometimes like expensive chairs come in, right, as tax or whatever it may be. Now you have to sell that for the equivalent of money or whatever it may be, and put that in the Bayt al-Mal. So this is also used for many public projects during the time of Uthman radiallahu anh, was the expansion of Masjid Nabawi, right, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's masjid, and also the expansion of Masjid al-Haram, the Kaaba, the masjid in Mecca. So during the time of Umar radiallahu anh, the Kaaba, or the Masjid al-Haram, was expanded. So Masjid al-Haram was expanded during the time of Umar radiallahu anh. What he did was, because the Muslim empire kept expanding, a lot of people were moving to Medina, number one, but a lot of people were coming for Umrah and for Hajj and for these pilgrimage rites that they were performing. Now, remember, the Kaaba, it originally didn't have people from all the way from Egypt, from northern African regions, from far as Khurasan, right? During the time of Uthman, for example, majority of, if not all of, modern day Iran was under Muslim rule, right? And the surrounding regions, Iraq, all of these areas, people from all of these areas were coming to perform Umrah and to perform Hajj. So the capacity that Masjid al-Haram was able to hold was beyond due. So Umar's time, they expanded. What he did, he purchased the surrounding homes and he demolished those houses. And after demolishing that, he added it to the Masjid al-Haram. Then during the time of Uthman, because these lands kept expanding, the growth was immense. So within the span of these years, they need to keep expanding it. So they decided to expand it again. During Uthman's time, they did the same thing. They purchased surrounding homes and all of that. They demolished it to make more area for tawaf, to make more area to walk around the Kaaba, and to perform these rites of Hajj. And it's mentioned that they built a short wall around the Haram as well, to kind of identify that this is Masjid al-Haram. So they it's mentioned that it was not taller than an average person, right? So it's probably like 5 foot, 6 foot maximum. So a short wall around the parameters to let us know that this is Masjid al-Haram. These public funds were used uh, for establishing the navy, which we spoke about as well, for moving the port, the main port of Arabia. Right, this was moved in the 26th year after Hijrah. It was moved to the city of Jeddah. Right, so the city of Jeddah became the main port. So the the public funds that were coming in, they were being used for different projects that were going to serve the greater needs of the Muslim community. Another thing that was done during the time of Uthman radiallahu an was that he appointed full-time muaddins. So he created a job position almost for the muaddin and set a stipend from the public treasury for the muaddin. That the job of the muaddin is going to be to give adhan, the call to prayer, and this is going to be a paid position of the Khilafah, of the government. Like this is now an official role. So he set a certain amount from Bayt al-Mal to set this as a state position. So this is the first time it becomes something that is state established. All right. Now these regional governments as well that they all started building their own main masjids. One interesting thing to note is just for us to understand the way that Jum'ah or the rites of Jum'ah is done. If you look at a traditional fiqh book, let me see the time. Okay. Before I mention this, let me just see if there's anything on the timeline. Okay. All right, we're good. So we'll talk about this, and we will most likely end today's halaqa with this. Yeah, we'll end with a chart that I want to share. I made a timeline. It's not complete yet, but I do want us to look at it and start when different events happen. So remember, this is going to be an incompleted timeline, but something we can take a look at. Let's talk about the khutbah thing first, and then we'll look at the timeline, and we'll end with that, inshallah. So in terms of the khutbah, if you look at the older books of fiqh, one of the conditions that you might find that might maybe confuse you or be of interest to you is that it will say that the Jum'ah is established with the permission of the Khalifa. That Jum'ah is established with the permission of the Khalifa. One of the earliest discussions, or not earliest, one of the discussions you'll see one of the fiqh discussions that took place in colonial or British India was whether Jum'ah is obligatory or not. And that is, it goes back to this fiqh issue where Jum'ah is only established when there's permission from the Khalifa. It cannot be established without permission from the Khalifa. And obviously for that it has to be a Muslim land, Darul Islam, and all of these rules and conditions. Without getting too confusing on the fiqh issue, so one of the things you'll find in the books of fiqh is that it needs this permission from the Khalifa. And it goes back to this idea that it is from the rights of the Khalifa to establish the Jum'ah prayer. So when we have Jum'ah prayer, if there's a Khalifa, the Khalifa has the right to lead the Jum'ah prayer, give the khutbah. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was the Prophet, obviously, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, it was Abu Bakr. Then Umar, it was Umar. Now, with these governors that are being sent out, they have permission from the Khalifa to establish a Jum'ah, right? So they'll establish a Jum'ah, in Iraq or in Kufa, in Basra, in Egypt, wherever they'll establish a Jum'ah. And throughout Islamic history, you will find that the Jum'ah khutbah would be read in the Khalifa's name. So it'll be, mentioning the Khalifa. And you'll still find this in many Muslim countries where, um, they'll have the king's name of that country mentioned in the Jum'ah khutbah. And that's because again, it goes back to that same principle that it's from the ruler of the land, or the Khalifa in essence, that has the right to that khutbah. So with the expansion of all of these masajid and many masajid throughout the country, even in pre-colonial, pre-British India, right, there was many masjids that were there. Now, obviously, the Khalifa is not going to each masjid, or the ruler, the Mughal emperor that's there, is not going to each of these masjids and giving khutbah. But the people that are leading khutbah there, number one, have general permission. Then through the establishment of the awqaf, right, the Islamic ministries, that the ministry then has permission from the Khalifa to establish Jum'ahs throughout the country, and all of these masjids can hold Jum'ahs or whatnot. But coming back to here, one of the ways of rebellion was to not attend Jum'ah, right? Now, we're not talking about whether that's permissible or not, whether it's permissible to skip out on Jum'ah or whatnot because of that. But one of the ways of rebellion was they wouldn't acknowledge the khilafah of somebody. So they'll say, we don't acknowledge this person as Khalifa, therefore we won't attend Jum'ah on that person's name, right? Very interesting psychology behind it. So like I said, one of these things that were being discussed in British India as well was whether Jum'ah would be wajib or not. To end that story and get back to ours, they ended up, the contemporary fatwa is that basically you do Jum'ah. Jum'ah is wajib in Western countries, and in countries anywhere where you have freedom of religion, you have to establish Jum'ah or whatnot. So that's what the end result became out of those things. But it's just interesting that they had those discussions based off of this fiqh ruling. Coming back here, Uthman radiallahu anh, obviously during his time, is supposed to be giving the Jum'ah. And he does conduct the Jum'ahs, but also his governors then conduct it on his behalf. So this is a tradition that the Khalifa gives the Jum'ah, or the Khalifa gives permission to establish Jum'ah in those areas, and gives permission to build those masjids, and that will deliver the public Jum'ah. So many times in the regions or in the provinces, you would have the main masjid, or what's known as the Jami'ah, right? The main Jami'ah. Right? These terms are not used as they used to be used. So sometimes now you hear it means like the big masjid. But these terms have meanings. So the main large masjid would usually be the one where the governor or the ruler of the province, it could even be a smaller area within the thing that has permission from the governor. That's where the Jum'ah would be held. Not every masjid would have permission to do Jum'ah. So right now, if you go to a Muslim country, you'll find almost every masjid around the corner doing Jum'ah, right? I'm not sure if certain Muslim countries still implement where there's only large masjids that are doing Jum'ah. But if you go to Egypt, for example, in Alexandria or Cairo, all of the smaller masjids in the corners of the streets everywhere, they'll all be holding Jum'ah, which is fine because there's permission to do so. But originally, it would be the Jami'ahs, the large masjids that would hold Jum'ah, and the khatib would be giving khutbah on behalf of the governor, the Khalifa, and their authority would all go back to the Khalifa, who is the Khalifa of the Khalifa of the Khalifa of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it keeps going back until the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remember when Umar became Khalifa, it was known as Khalifata Rasulullah, the representative of the representative of Rasulullah. So this hukum of the permission of Jum'ah goes to the Khalifa, who has their authority through the Prophet ﷺ to establish Jum'ah. Now, obviously there's a difference of opinion in terms of, does that count as spiritual authority? Does that not count as spiritual authority or whatnot? Most Sunnis recognize that the Khalifa doesn't necessarily have to have spiritual authority in a sense. The Shia view is slightly different. The ruler usually has to have the spiritual authority, and that's why they view Ali as the carrier of the worldly authority and the spiritual authority of the Prophet ﷺ, whereas the Sunnis kind of separate it in certain senses. It's a separate discussion as well. There's so many different topics we jumped into that I don't recall the core conversation. If anybody can message what we were talking about, we can jump back on it. but it was in terms of the khutbahs being established by or the khutbahs being led by the Khalifas at the time. And this is a practice that's carried on until after, where many of the Khalifas, they were title Khalifas, and they weren't really knowledgeable in terms of the Islamic principles and things like that, where they would just give permission to somebody else to lead on their behalf, and they wouldn't give khutbahs. But the four Khulafa Rashidin, they always did the khutbahs themselves, unless they had a reason not to do it. But they led their khutbahs, and they gave permission to others to establish it on their behalf in regions as well. But the authority extends from the Khalifa of the Muslims. All right. So we said we will share a chart. Thank you, Brother Riyal, for that reminder. Let's look at this screen share. I will try to update this chart. Like I said, this is not complete. Okay. Yeah, like I said, this is not complete. I did start working on it, so I didn't want to share it. So we start to get an idea. If you look here, some of these things we've spoke about. So elected by the council as Khalifa. So this is 23rd after Hijrah. 23rd after Hijrah is also when Umar radiallahu an died, when he was the assassination attempt took place, and then he eventually died on his deathbed. So this is the year 23rd after Hijrah. 24th, you have Muawiyah leading the campaigns against the Byzantine. Alexandria is taken 25th. Now, one thing I do want to point out, this is important, with this timeline, any other history book, especially Islamic history as well, remember these dates not necessarily are exact or precise. Sometimes they're a little off. Sometimes it happens at the end of one year, in the beginning of another, so people don't recall exactly when it took place, but they know it was about a year ago or whatever it may be. So remember, if you see a slightly different date, and I have an example here. So some sources mention that Cyprus was taken by sea in the 27th year of Hijrah. Other sources mention it was 28. Or it could be the end of 27 and 28. The campaign continued throughout a few months into both years. Allahu A'lam. But don't take these dates as like hard dates. Like this is when it precisely happened. Certain dates, like the 23rd year, we know this is when Umar radiallahu anh passed away and Uthman was elected Khalifa. So there's pretty much all sources agree on these dates. Other sources, it might differ, right? When exactly was when all of Khurasan was taken. So don't get stuck on, no, it was the 27th year, or it was 25th year, or 26th year, right? And obviously certain sources are more reliable. So we stick to the reliable sources versus a non-reliable source. Alexandria is retaken 25th after Hijrah. So this is when Amr ibn al-As goes and kind of finishes off the rebellion that takes place, which is backed by the Byzantine Empire from their capital in Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. Here are more areas. Azerbaijan, Armenia is retaken. Masjid al-Haram, this is what we were talking about, right? So it's expanded during the 26th year of Hijrah. The seaport is also moved to Jeddah. We also spoke about this. Cyprus by sea, it's one of these 2 years. Masjid Nabawi is expanded. So Masjid Nabawi, a very similar situation happens. There's more people moving in. Remember, Medina is becoming a very, very large city compared to when the Prophet passed away. All of these people are moving in on the capital, right? Everybody wants to live. This is the capital of the Muslims. Everybody wants to live there. This is the city of the Prophet. Medina itself, the word itself is there because it means the city, right? The city of who? Medina to Nabi. Medina of the city of the Prophet, the messenger. So Medina is a hotspot. Everybody wants to move to Medina, and it expands. So there's so many people that they cannot just pray simply in the Masjid Nabawi. They need to expand Masjid Nabawi. So that takes place as well. Areas of Khurasan. So this is Nishapur, Tus. Very famous scholars are from Nishapur and Tus, both of these areas, both in modern day Iran. Anybody know who's from Nishapur or Tus, actually? One of the most famous Muslim scholars, Imam Ghazali. His name is Imam Ghazali at-Tusi. He's from this city of Tus. Death of Abu Sufyan. So Abu Sufyan passes away 31 after Hijrah. Imam Muslim, very good, right? So Nishapur, Imam Muslim is from there, I believe that's correct. Hajjaj ibn Muslim ibn Hajjaj. Okay, death of Abu Sufyan, and there's many other people from Tus as well that you find. In the year 32nd after Hijrah, you have Al-Abbas. So this is the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not Ibn Abbas, this is Al-Abbas. Abdurrahman ibn Auf. So we remember Abdurrahman ibn Auf, one of the companion, one of the 10 Ashara Mubashara, the companions that are that the Prophet ﷺ said will be granted Jannah, or that were given the glad tidings of Jannah in this dunya. He's also a very wealthy companion. He's one of the 6 chosen by Umar on the council to elect. He's also the one that eventually, chooses or gives bay'ah to Uthman radiallahu an. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an passes away during this time. Abu Dhar, right? We spoke about Abu Dhar and the incident of Abu Dhar and Muawiyah radiallahu an. Military expedition against Abyssinia, right? So now, towards the end of Uthman's time, there's military expedition going south. Abyssinia is south of Egypt. So that's taking place. Now, what we will do is next Halaqa, we're going to start talking about the sedition, right? The sort of rebellion that starts sowing within the Muslim communities against Uthman radiallahu an. And it starts taking place during these years, right? So obviously it just doesn't take place on one day, right? It's something that sows over time. And we will start talking about that and leading up to the killing of Uthman radiallahu an. So this is a general timeline. Like I said, it's not finished, so you have some things missing that I didn't put in yet. I will try to add more things, but just so it's out there and we have a general idea of what we were talking about so far. As you've seen, most of these important things that we touched on, and now we have an idea of the layout of them. All right. Let's end with this, inshallah. We'll open it up for Q&A if anybody has any. Let me stop the live stream.